tracking them. Hey, wonderful. Sorry for that little late start, everyone. Thanks for staying with us this evening for this special event. We are thrilled to have with us this group of leaders from the LaSallian Network of schools. We would like to start this discussion, though, as we do all things, in prayer. Mark, would you lead us in prayer, please?
It would be my honor. As in our LaSallian tradition, we begin everything with prayer, as do all Catholic schools and all Catholic events. But let us begin by remembering that we are in the holy presence of God. Loving God, you chose me to be a teacher, and you have blessed me with talents and graces for guiding those who are entrusted to my care. The work is yours, Lord, and I am yours. Set me aflame with the love of the Holy Spirit so that I may adore you in my students. Give me the grace to touch their hearts, to see them as living images of your Son, to be as gentle as a mother and as firm as a father, to show great kindness and affection, to correct them with respect and compassion, to put up with their faults generously, to discern the true character of each soul, to help form good habits proper to their age, and to teach more by example than by words. Walk with me so that I may walk with them as an apostle, a visible angel, a good shepherd, a master builder, a caring older brother or older sister. Jesus, come and live in my heart today. St. John Baptist de La Salle, patron of all educators, pray for us.
Pray for us.
And live Jesus in our hearts forever.
Thank you. So I am going to introduce the leader of our panel discussion, our convener. Mark Freund is the Executive Director for the Office of LaSallian Education, and he was gracious enough to work with me to gather some very talented educators in the LaSallian Network to talk about these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, Mark, if you would like to maybe ask the panelists to introduce themselves and just give a quick little snapshot of their school, we'll start out that way.
Sure, Andrea. As a family of educational ministries, we're blessed to have approximately 100 in our region of North America, and we have with us today 3 chief administrators from schools in different parts of the country. So let's go from west to east, and I'd like to introduce and ask her to say a few words about herself and about her school, Dr. Melinda Lawler-Scrady from Sacred Heart Cathedral in San Francisco.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you so much, Andrea, for the introduction and for the opportunity today to share a little bit about my story, connect the dots to the other leaders and the other schools in the community that we're graced to serve in Catholic education. I serve Catholic education out in San Francisco. The name of the school is Sacred Heart Cathedral. Sacred Heart was a boys' school. Cathedral was a girls' school. They were across the street. And yes, you know the rest of the story if it's called Sacred Heart Cathedral. The school merged in 1987, and it is a unusual merger in that the school became stronger together than apart. Very successful school, high performing, 1,351 students today. We are in a hybrid model, meaning I think most of us know what that means, so I don't need to go into it. And San Francisco is just, as we're recording, is just coming out of a 1-year lockdown where people can go back to restaurants and work out at a 10% capacity. Maybe they are working out at 10% capacity in fitness environments. I serve the school as its chief administrator. In our school, it's a president, and my background is in class, race, and gender issues and how adolescents make meaning in the social construction of their identity against the mystified concept called the American dream. Thank you.
And moving a little further east to the Twin Cities of Minnesota, Dr. Brian Bass from De La Salle High School in Minneapolis. Sir?
Thank you, Mark and Andrea. I won't spend too much time here. I want to get into the meat of it, but Brian Bass, I'm also a chief administrator here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. De La Salle High School, we are in our 121st year. The school is currently comprised of 56% students of color, 44% white students, and almost 60% of our students receive some type of tuition assistance. We are very diverse. We are the most diverse Catholic and LaSallian institution in the state of Minnesota. And we have approximately 720 students as we speak. We are also in a hybrid learning model as well, and seeking to go 4 days, offer 4 days a week after spring break, which would be the second week of April for us. So I am in my first year in this role. I was previously in public education and served in a variety of roles as a principal for 13 years in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Great to be here.
And ending up on the East Coast in the Empire State is Carrie Conroy of LaSalle Academy, New York City.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Andrea. It's a privilege to be here tonight. I work at LaSalle Academy, as Mark said. LaSalle is an all-boys Catholic high school in the Lower East Side or East Village of Manhattan. It's a very small school. It's about 250 boys with a very rich and long tradition. We're in our 173rd year. I've been at the school this is my 20th year at the school. I came there as a LaSallian volunteer right out of college, did religion and campus ministry, was a guidance counselor for several years before I moved into administration. I'm in my 4th year as principal. Our students are predominantly Latino, African American, Hispanic. About 90% of our students are on some sort of aid. And we are an incredibly diverse population in that, and that we recently, last year, did a survey of the parents of our students. We are proud to say that we had about a 60% return rate on that survey. It was about countries of origin, and we at this point have 45 different countries of origin of the parents of our students. So we have an incredibly rich, diverse population. So it's a privilege to be there. I joined the LaSallian Volunteer Program thinking I'd be there for a year or two, and 20 years later, here we are.
Thank you, Carrie. Can we get started? If we can, let me just toss the question out and see where you all want to take it. But after having spent too many years as a leader in Catholic education, not too many years, too many opportunities, too many great years. One of the things that I know is that we all have a challenge on occasion in dealing with issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This was highlighted in some way, in many different ways, I should say, in response to the violent death of George Floyd last year. So having put that in context, can you offer to us some of your views on what those 3 words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, mean to your communities? And how are they interrelated, particularly in your experience as Catholic and Catholic LaSallian educators?
Brian?
Okay, you want me to jump in? I'll jump in. So again, Brian Bass here. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if we take those 3 concepts in essentially, I would say in their in the most recent, era of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity has really meant that we want to diversify either our student body, diversify our staff or our workforce, and that's the actual makeup of the individuals at an organization. So that's the actual literal number and percentages of diversity. The equity tends to address or speak to outcomes, right? So how are the achievement outcomes? So based on the experiences that individuals of color have as employees or as students, are they having equitable experiences in the organization? And then the inclusion portion of it really speaks to our retention and the kind of community, and have we thought about intentionally what it means to embrace and celebrate the contributions of all members of our school community, and that they're respectfully represented throughout our curriculum and throughout our thinking, throughout our planning, throughout and that it's baked into our systems and practices within our organization. So that's how I would briefly speak to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and offer other panelists the opportunity to build on that if they'd like.
I just to jump in on the piece of the inclusion in terms of how that I try to play that out at LaSalle is just trying to make sure that not only is everyone represented, but that they have a seat at the decision-making tables. So trying to make sure that that representation exists on all the committees, in all the conversations, and all the the decisions and the forming that is done in making the decisions around our school, and involving the parents, the students, and honoring their heritage and their culture and bringing that in to make our school even more rich in everything that we do.
I would just add as a history background that every generation has a moment where it needs to pivot, and it's galvanized by, for whatever reason, galvanized by something that really moves us. It's very sad to say that there are so many opportunities to be elevated and very few that are really mobilizing of the society. And like Emmett Till would have been in the civil rights era, pre-civil rights era in the Deep South, the George Floyd death challenged us to think about this as our child, our son, our father, our brother. So the sweeping nature of how we experience this globally really challenged us, as Brian said and as Carrie said, to think about what does it mean to be, what do we mean when we're using language diverse? What does it mean to be inclusive? What does it mean to be nurturing? And so for us as a school in San Francisco, which works extremely hard to be diverse in its student population, but confronted with the realities that the starting price for anything, an apartment, is $1 million. It's going to take a lot of leadership, a lot of thinking, a lot of institutional cooperation to achieve an outcome called diverse, inclusive, and nurturing, and equitable, to be sure. So it's just a comment. It's not really an answer to your question, Mark, but that's what we're facing out here.
Excellent. Again, we all speak for those who are not familiar with our CARAs and with our view of the educational world. You'll hear us speak of core principles, and among our 5 core principles, which would include obviously an outstanding education and faith in the abiding presence of God, includes a respect for all, includes the notion and the concept of concern for the poor and social justice, but also of inclusive community. So the whole diversity, inclusion, and equity conversation is a part of what it is we do on a daily basis if we adhere to those cores. So let me twist that question around a little bit if I can. Talk about challenges and opportunities that you see. Your leaders working to integrate this into your daily operation. How do you see, what opportunities do you see, and what challenges do you see in your day-to-day work? Maybe in how you overcome them.
I think as a school that has such a long history, being at an institution that has a 173-year history, that while it's amazing and I'm so proud of it, but when you have such long history, you can, I think, get stuck in this romanticizing of tradition and what's been, and therefore it should be, and this has been such an incredibly challenging time, and that's an understatement of the year, right? That the challenges that we've been through. But what I keep trying to focus on and find one positive aspect of the COVID situation is that it forced everything to be turned upside down. So we had to do it that way no longer can be a reason to do something because you can't do it that way right now. And so while it's been so difficult on so many levels, the blessing that I found that has come out of it is that we've gotten unstuck. Like I don't have to do it that way anymore because of any circumstances dictated that I don't do that anymore. So I'm trying to take that mentality that all these new things are possible and shift it into this arena. Not only in how are we trying to deliver education to our students in this hybrid way or whatever, but also this mindset of, oh, different ways of doing this are possible and can be successful. So can I take that mindset of the faculty that might, some of those people that might have been a little stuck, and say, see how that was possible? This is possible too. And just because it always has been doesn't mean it always should be, and to use that. So using this time frame that has overlapped somehow, the post George Floyd world and COVID happening at the same time, and try to move on that and say, look at your curriculum and what are you changing and what needs to be changed, and just, can I get people to be more open-minded because they've now seen that different things are possible than they ever thought were possible.
We had an audience question related to your response. This person would like to know how long the core principle of inclusion has been a part of your tradition, and has it always had the same meaning?
The 5 core principles are a creation of the community. They began as a part of a conversation at a LaSallian summer youth gathering at St. Mary's College of California, probably more than 20 years ago, but certainly in the 1990s. And our concepts of the 5 core principles and the application of the 5 core principles has over those years remained remarkably consistent in terms of everything from the faith piece to the academic piece to the inclusion and welcoming community piece. So I think everything has been a part of us. It's inherent in our charism. It's the lens through which we see the world. It's the lens through which we see our church, and it's the lens certainly through which we see those who are entrusted to our care. But I could be corrected on that, Carrie, Melinda, Brian.
Well, I was going to align with you that the U.S. Catholic bishops' letters that came out in the early 80s were reflections of the talks and the works of some of our modern day saints like Dorothy Day, and the brothers in particular. And I also served the Daughters of Charity mission. They were way ahead by a century about what does it mean to see yourself as poor, see yourself as othered, see yourself as in need. So it's very refreshing to say that these tenets are frameworks that are used in all of our institutions today. And these were the leaders who put it together.
I think it speaks to an opportunity for sure. There is the opportunity to engage in that conversation every year as a North Star for us, right? That we aspire to be more intentional and more deliberate in every aspect of our culture and our experience at our institutions to live those principles, that charism out. And I think that the George Floyd moment pushed us from grace around the speed at which we think about how to think about it thoughtfully as a learning community, as a faculty, and as a staff, to needing to have deliberate speed, needing to have urgency around making sure that we have young people who feel held in the space and that their humanity is honored, right, in this space. And so at our institution, it looks like now rolling up our sleeves and prioritizing restorative circle conversations with students about the Chauvin trial. It's happening right here in the Twin Cities. It literally is happening a 7-iron away from our campus, stone's throw away. And it's going to be, we already feel it, right? We already feel anxiety. We already feel emotions around this experience. And our young people definitely have an opinion around the situation. So I think that the deliberate speed and the urgency is where our communities are looking for us to be leaders when we say that this is our charism and we say that these are the principles that guide us. Then show us, right? Lean into that and show us that.
One of the challenges, I'm sorry.
Also, I was just going to say, our charism, our slogan, our credo at school is enter to learn, leave to serve. And I always want to say, and lead, enter to learn, leave to serve, and lead. We can't sit back. No, it's things don't take care of themselves. I appreciate. Thank you, Mark.
As a former, and as I sometimes say, recovering school chief administrator, one of the challenges that I hear colleagues speaking about, regardless of what community their schools may be affiliated with, if any, or what level of school, whether it's an elementary or secondary, is how do we challenge the status quo, not only in recruiting faculty and staff that reflect a high level of diversity and inclusiveness, but also reflect that that passion and appropriate space for them in terms of leading in a Catholic educational environment. So how do we invite them in, and how do we provide opportunity when it's sometimes, people will tell me that it's challenging to recruit a diverse faculty. Any thoughts?
I entered De La Salle for the most part after most hiring had been completed. But I would offer perspective from about 17 years of trying to hire really strong faculty at very diverse school communities in the Twin Cities. And that is, word of mouth tends to speak to whether this is a safe space for people of color. And if people of color have had a positive experience in your community and in your organization and have spoken positively about that experience, they'll be encouraged to apply and be a part of that experience. And so I joined the De La Salle community July 1st, and I get a couple of messages from some African-American brothers who are on the east side of the river in St. Paul, and they're like, we've got this fantastic candidate for you, young brother who really is inspired and is an outstanding music educator. And we just think, he would be wonderful at D. We've heard great things about D. We've heard. And I think that has to be the experience. And so the community has to be ripe for that diversity. And I think that's where the tension lies, in unpacking what kind of culture we have. And if you don't have a lot of folks of color in your organization to speak to what their experience has been like and what the culture has felt like to immerse themselves into, it's kind of hard to sell that. But if you are going to sell that and you're going to try to get more diverse, then it's really important as a faculty and staff that we are very specific about this being a goal of our organization, and prepare ourselves and engage in some really crucial and courageous conversations around race, and have thought about how our lived experiences impact the way that we show up in the space as a largely white community and what we unconsciously perpetuate.
Yeah, I would say, yes, absolutely, Melinda. It's so much, I think, and I was latching on to the retention piece, and I think that's what Brian is saying, that if the experience isn't good, then why would anyone stay? And that word of mouth, that power of that word of mouth, as Brian spoke to. So how are we supporting our faculty members, new faculty members of color, how are we supporting? How are we engaging? Are we listening? Are we providing that support? And do people feel valued? How so much is about how does someone feel while they are there? And sometimes in Catholic education, a big challenge is the salary that's there, but so much can be about how someone feels while they're in your environment. Are they a valuable member of this community who feels heard and contributes, and their ideas are brought to life at times, and that speaks volumes to them, I think.
There's a question in the chat room by, I think it's Farrar, but maybe it's Ferrer. Audrey is saying, one of the challenges of addressing diverse identities is not just about welcoming those who are racialized, but how to make LGBTQ plus students feel like they belong. What efforts are made to create a safe and welcoming space? And I just wanted to read it out loud so that it's in the recording, because it's such an important question. And it challenges us as Catholic leaders in Catholic education to see every student in the light that God created her or him, or other. And we don't have the language yet to capture student identity as it's being constructed right before our eyes. And so I would just say, Audrey, that sorry, there's a little dog in our house. Audrey, every person who's in front of me is a child of God. And I know that Pope Francis has taken a step forward in saying, who am I to judge and who am I to say what's right or what's wrong? But he's also been criticized for not putting some substance behind it. And so in our schools, I'm not speaking for the other leaders here, but I have seen this and witnessed this. It's the way that we model our example, like Brian mentioned and Carrie mentioned. It's the way that we make these extra efforts. We don't wait until someone is challenging us saying, do I go in this bathroom or this bathroom? No, that's so simple. Let's figure out the bathroom situation. How hard is that? So I hope that's a start to answer. But I would like to say that when I was a high school teacher, it was not a small thing for students to approach me, as Brian mentioned, and say, would you be willing to be our moderator for this group? And I said, yeah, no problem. I really welcomed it. And I learned a lot about myself as a teacher. But students can't go there alone. Our teachers need to be cultivated to come to our high schools, as Brian's mentioning. And retention, like Carrie is saying, retention's everything, because it gets around in a community which communities are really authentic in the largest, grandest, deepest meaning of the word Catholic. Thank you for the question, Audrey.
One of the other questions, and I think it sort of it's a logical place to offer it here, is what do you say in general as the most difficult area, if you will, of diversity, equity, and inclusion to implement?
I'll speak for my school in that we have had to make it a policy that a minimum of 10 to 12% of our student population must be the poorest of the poor so that we can adhere to mission. And I know that I come from Milwaukee, and you would not think that that would be something you'd have to strive for. But we are seeing out in the West Coast, in the realities of the economies, that staying true to mission and seeking families who are in need of an excellent education but cannot afford it is essential. And so it's a pursuit.
We're probably on the other end than Melinda's school in the sense that
Right.
can we keep our tuition low enough, because this is who we serve. And in New York City, as it is all over the country, so many Catholic schools are closing. And so a lot of the schools that serve populations like LaSalle Academy in Manhattan have closed in New York City over the past 10 to 15 years. And so there are, another handful of all boys Catholic high schools in Manhattan, but they are not, we're not serving the same population. And I keep kind of banging on the door of anyone who will listen, the Archdiocese, donors, everybody, our board, we can't keep raising this tuition and then expect to serve this population. We're going to price ourselves out of who are, of the most in need. And if, and we're really doing this good work. And so really trying to, find more ways. So for us, it's that side of things is the most challenging, is continuing to find that money to provide the aid available, because there are students who this is their home and this is where they would, the next natural step for them. And so many of those schools like ours are closing, unfortunately. So we are, really proud to be, I keep saying we're the last man standing in Manhattan doing what we're doing. Being, serving the single sex male, the only all boys model in the city. So.
Yeah, I think I'll take a different twist on it, and that is the classroom experience, right? So educators are across a spectrum, skilled, right? Highly skilled to an emerging skilledness in their profession, their vocation, and so their lived experiences and unpacking those lived experiences from an equity lens, right? Your faculty is going to be in a range of places. And so developmentally, trying to focus the professional development to meet where the range of skill and aptitude is at is challenging. The other part of that in a faith-based institution, when people come to serve and to be in a faith-based environment and they're about the mission, there's a little bit of I wouldn't say complacency, but there's confidence that because I love my students so much that I can't be racist, that I can't be prejudiced, that I can't be contributing to things that perpetuate systems of oppression, right? That I can't, because I'm following, God's message, right? And so it's a bit more nuanced than love, right? Like love is critical, right? Like no doubt. But I think we have to understand what systems and practices were here before we got here that perpetuate social hierarchy and caste in our society. So I think that the rub, I think a little bit is, how do we humble ourselves to be learners in this space and to really unpack what we bring with us individually in the classroom and how that impacts our classroom culture. And then there's the, so there's that introspective piece. And then there are, what are the tools that I'm going to use to help me be more culturally responsive and culturally affirming from my words, from my inferences, like really being conscious of how those things play out in the classroom and the tools that I have to use to be more effective for all students in my classroom. So I think that's a challenge in this context.
Excellent.
We had an audience question sort of related to your comments, Brian. Somebody asked, how should they respond if a student comes to them and says they're feeling discriminated against due to their identity issues? How do you sort of keep those lines of communication open? They're looking for feedback and as an instructor.
Yeah, I think organizationally, I would hope that that the institution has had a conversation as a faculty and staff about how we show up in support of students around whatever difference is in the space. And I would want them to get curious about and really validate that student's experience, and then connect them with who the appropriate person is in their building who processes those conversations more carefully and more strategically based on their training. For us, that would be our dean of students, that would be any of our counselors or personal counseling supports in our building to really be there and validate and listen. Yeah, I mean, I think that's how I would hope that our teacher would handle that in the classroom.
One of the things I would add on to that is, just as a former school counselor myself, is that as Brian had mentioned, the teachers have so much love for their students. And unfortunately, what happens sometimes is that because the teachers are the ones who see them first before the counselor does usually. They get referred to a counselor, and the teacher, with all the best intentions of the world, gets too deep and then panics and then drops the student. Not that you would ever intentionally do that, but that can happen. And that's, just to be careful with that, because that's the last thing that student needs, is all of a sudden that teacher to be very busy after school. And so I just encourage teachers, and when I'm going through training with them, when different situations come up, that 100% be the listening ear, 100% be that person that is listening, but don't get too far in, because if you don't have the proper training and then you're too deep and then you panic and step way back out, it's done more damage than good. So to be the listening ear, to do all, to be that supportive, and validation, but then make the introduction to the proper people. But they have to be trained, as Brian said, whether it's the dean, whether it's the counselor, but that handoff sometimes is a really important step, even though you might feel like, oh, I want to keep talking to this person. It really is important that the person with the right training really walks down that road so that more damage isn't done.
Carrie alluded to this, and this is coming off of a question or two that are offered by the audience. Carrie alluded to it earlier, that we've had a perfect storm, as it were, of really awful events over the last 12 months. The brutal death of George Floyd, the COVID virus pandemic that we've talked incessantly about, pivoting and all the other verbs and adjectives that we can use. What have you seen that you've had to do differently in the last, well, it is March, so the last 12 months, so that you're meeting emerging needs that we could classify on the scale or within the categories of equity, diversity, and inclusion? What have you had to do new? What have you had to do differently? How have you managed to maintain it in a hybrid world, which we've all done, I think, to some extent or another? Speak to any experiences that you may want to share.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, obviously, we've had to go virtual, right? And we're hybrid. So we went to a block schedule this year. De La Salle was previously on an 8-period day and moved to a block schedule where there's 4 periods a day. It allowed us to create an extra block that's a what I need time, when time, and it creates flexibility for us. And during that time, it's allowed us to have some open-ended space for kids to be able to check in on the things that they need to check in with. So we've had some different structures that have allowed us to be agile and nimble around student needs and letting them be self-directed and advocating for what they need and having agency. But what we have strived to do always is that as kids have issues and concerns that they need to talk through or process, that they're able to introduce those in the context of a trusted adult or what have you. But with the insurrection and with the trial, we have not left it to student agency. We have certainly structured specific conversations that all students would have with every teacher, and really given a script and talked about the importance of us being the space to be able to, if we have social justice teachings within the Catholic Church, this is a social justice moment, as Melinda alluded to earlier, and it is absolutely a moment that is speaking to them, and they want to be engaged, and they want to be able to have discussion, and they want to be able to talk through this, and they want to be able to act on their faith, and they want to be able to be in service to something that feels like it's contributing to interrupting this systemic and oppressive force that they're seeing within the criminal justice system. They really want to contribute to make it better, to make our space safer. So that is something new that we're doing that we weren't doing before, is being intentional about holding space to have conversations. And we will have conversations throughout the trial.
That's phenomenal. It just is one educator to another. That's just phenomenal to hear, because I know you know this. So I just got to say it out loud. You're modeling restorative justice circles so that people can help internalize those skill sets that they're going to need so much in life ahead. That's really neat. My simple answer was going to be that the more people we bring to the table, whether they're ready for it or not, the more people there are at the table. When will we be ready? So that's my answer.
The only part I would add, just to really tighten that up, so we had a group of faculty who came together with our principal to talk about how we want to approach this, and to honor the voice of one of our teachers. He said, we should have already been on this, right? We should have already have had this mapped out. And he said, so given that, let's have a constructive conversation, right? Because in a year that's so unprecedented and so challenging, and we're planning, and having to shift and adapt. So our social studies department is going to unpack the legal content that's involved in the trial, so that kids have the concrete knowledge around how this works and what's the burden of proof and how this case will essentially unfold. And then we have the restorative conversations happening. And then we also have counseling supports and counseling stations set up so that students know exactly who they need to go to, as Carrie said, to have that specific support if they're experiencing some trauma.
Is there anything else? We all speak with a common vocabulary, and I see that Andrea has shared in the chat the slide of the 5 core. Is there anything specifically in the charism, and this is a nice way of wrapping up this conversation in some ways. Is there anything specific within our charism or within any charism or identity of a school, the DEI work, or to which DEI is directly related? With the 5 core principles, you can see it. They're an element of most of our institutions' mission statements in some way, shape, or form. But how else can you see it playing out?
So Mark, I just want to make
Or
sure I
not?
have the question
Sure.
captured correctly. So what is the potential for the charism beyond the obvious for DEI work?
Well, specifically, how does the charism of school relate to our emerging work in diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, I think it's a really important grounding tool that roots us in our guiding principles, and it gives us a permission, and you would argue now an obligation in this moment when it's being tested, right? Our faith is being tested in this moment. Will we be true to our core principles? And there's some accountability, at least in our diverse community that we're in right now. Like you need to deliver on this, and you better deliver on this, with social media blasting institutions for not showing up in this space and not being a leader. And you don't want to be that social media account that's blowing up because they didn't live into these core principles. And so we have a responsibility to really get clear about that. So it's a real opportunity. It's a real opportunity for us to take that and create statements of commitment, right? So one thing that we want to pursue in our strategic planning process that, fingers crossed, we get to start here in early April, is we're beginning with a statement that is our diversity, equity, inclusion statement, that speaks to our commitments, and then you build out your plan to implement that and to go deep into how we bake this into the systems and practices within our organization. So,
okay.
We are also doing strategic visioning as a team approach that mixes board members, community members, colleagues, divisional leaders as a jumping off point, like Carrie mentioned earlier, to take a look at the pandemic as not a limiting factor, but a portal to be something different and to allow disruption to give birth to creation in order to deepen and recreate new experiences that are transformative, but grounded in the charisms.
I think we're all somehow engaged in strategic planning at the same time. I'm not sure how that happened for our 3 panelists at the same time, but we too are engaged in this process, and with a group of people, board members, teachers, staff members, pulling in parents and things like students, things like that. So, but yeah, as both of you have said, really taking this opportunity to hold ourselves accountable. We are obligated to this work, and it can't just be on paper. It has to be in action. So, looking at those core principles and saying, are we living this out in all of our policies and procedures and practices? Are we really who we say we are? And trying to really do a self-assessment and check ourselves where we need to be checked. What does our board look like? Does our board reflect our student population? Does it, so we realized it did not. Making a concerted effort over the past 6 months to change that, and using word of mouth, using people, people that we know, and making connections and bringing people in. But we have our faculty is pretty diverse. Our student body is very diverse, but our board was not. So really trying to hold ourselves accountable in that arena.
I know we're at the end of or close to being at the end of the scheduled allotment. Is there anything that I should have asked that I didn't, or anything that any of our panelists wish to add?
I would just add that failure is a component that schools attract teachers who have been really wonderful students. They're not accustomed to failure. And this work that we're doing is deeply personal. It's flawed, very human work. It's the worst. You never really know if you've made any successful impact, but we still need to do it, and it's really important in the construction of a future leader in our not just our lives, but the lives ahead. So I just think it's the most important thing that we do. Thank you. For
I just continue. Sorry, Melinda. I just continue to try to say we've got to do all of this with humility, and where we've been in error, admit it and say that was wrong and we shouldn't have done that, and we've got to move, and this is how we're going to move forward. So continuing to make, I think there's so much fear surrounding this that sometimes you can be paralyzed if I'm going to do the wrong thing, and but we will stumble. Admit when you're wrong, correct course, keep moving forward, lead by example. If that's what we want our students to do, then we've got to show that in leadership, and we can't just pretend we never made a mistake as leaders. So be able to, admit that out loud and let that be a teachable moment in and of itself when those moments occur.
Yeah,
Well, thank you
I
all.
would add.
Sorry.
Go
ahead.
I just would add, history matters. And if history matters, then we have to be able to embrace this moment and this opportunity to educate ourselves, to really understand how our institutions arrived at the point at which they were grappling with discrimination, how they were grappling with systems and practices that contributed to racism and racist practices. And it doesn't mean that I think there's a lot of tension inside of grappling with the history, but we need to understand it so that we can understand the imperative before us and understand exactly what we're trying to unpack, what we're trying to untangle, what we're trying to pull apart. And then, as Melinda said, use this as a portal to like unprecedented creativity and how we design for our future, our collective future. Our collective future. I just think that's so important.
I want to thank our three panelists, Melinda, Brian, and Carrie, for being with us tonight. As we end everything, let's always remember that we're in God's presence. St. John Baptist de La Salle, pray for us.
For us.
Pray for us.
And of Jesus in our hearts
Forever.
Andrea, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your expertise and just your giving heart in the conversations we had tonight, and also the ones that we had preparing for tonight. We really are thankful for your presence here and your wisdom. And thanks to our audience who has tuned in. I know it's late for us on the East Coast. We hope that you will continue to join us for the next 2 days. There is an evaluation form in the chat if you would be so kind as to give us some feedback today. You'll also be getting that via email in the morning if you're too tired to do it now. But join us tomorrow. We'll be starting again at the same time, 3:30, and we hope you've had a wonderful day. Take some time to stop by our expo hall, visit our sponsors who have made this event possible. And thank you so much to LaSallian Education for sponsoring and bringing together this event.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.